Thank you, Vice Chair Maloney. Dr. Hupp, in your testimony you mentioned a surprisingly common misunderstanding about guns, the difference between semi-automatic guns and those that are not. Are there any other common misconceptions that you find as you visit with Americans?
Yes. I think something that always jumps out to me that's frankly been a frustration for me for a very long time is that in many of the states that allow carry, and I don't care if it's concealed carry or open carry, just allow carry, why is it that you all will trust the teacher across the street at a grocery store walking around with families and strollers, and yet the moment she comes across the street into her place of work, the school, where we know the schools are targets, why are we saying suddenly we don't trust her? We don't trust her to protect herself or her students. I'm not saying arm the teachers. I've never said that. But those that already have jumped through the hoops to be able to arm themselves should be trusted in those places that we know are targets. That's a big one for me. And again, ridding ourselves of gun-free zones. Again, those are targets. And let me clarify that I don't think my gun is a guarantee. It's not a guarantee. It just changes the odds in many circumstances. I don't think we should be focusing on the tool. I've had people say, well, your gun wouldn't have made a difference in the Las Vegas situation. But I think that just lacks a little imagination. The guy had 2 planes a mile away. All he had to do was fly one of them into the crowd. He would have killed hundreds, if not thousands, that way.
Thank you. Dr. Lott, some of your fellow witnesses have referred to poll numbers regarding universal background checks. Are you familiar with those polls, and what's your opinion on them?
All right, well, people have mentioned polls showing 90%, 95%, 97% support. These are usually one-sentence questions that really do little more than ask people whether they want to try to stop criminals from going and obtaining guns. If you actually looked at ballot initiatives that have been put on the ballot, most recently in 2016 in Maine and Nevada, Michael Bloomberg would outspend his political opponents by ratios of 6-to-1 or 3-to-1. But still lost. There's a reason why he's not putting ballot initiatives on for these background checks. If it really was 90% or 80% or 70% support for these things, it wouldn't be necessary for him to outspend the other side just to be able to try to get near 50% in terms of the results there. And I think if they really thought that there was this huge support, he would be putting more initiatives on the ballot, and we're not seeing that.
We've heard a lot of talk today about different kinds of research that have been that has been conducted. Is there a type of research you'd like to see more of when it comes to firearms?
Well, there's a huge amount of research that's done anyway. The federal government from 2015 through 2018 spent $43.5 million. You have people like Michael Bloomberg, who's literally spending hundreds of millions of dollars on this, George Soros, the Joyce Foundation, others are spending tremendous amounts of money. RAND is spending $20 million, and apparently, hopefully, gets up to $50 million on this. The interesting thing to me is that this vast amount of research is almost all the funding's being concentrated on public health. There's huge differences, as I showed in the survey that we had. Economists and criminologists who haven't been getting this type of government funding are much, much more skeptical of any of these different types of gun control laws that work. The funding for the CDC and 90% of the $43.5 million that the federal government spent went to public health research.
In the time we have remaining, as I was reading your written testimony, you have some charts and some analysis that discusses the relationship between gun-related homicides and gun ownership rates in different countries. Can you walk us through those really quickly?
Well, I mean, we have homicide data for different countries as well as firearm homicide. I'll just mention one thing since we've had a little bit of discussion. Only about half the countries in the world even report firearm homicide data. You know, we're kind of spoiled with all the data that we have here. But one of the reasons why the United States looks relatively high in terms of firearm homicides is that the countries with the highest homicide rates don't report homicides. But if you look at either homicides or firearm homicides. The countries with the highest gun ownership tend to have the lowest homicide rates. And that's also true for mass public shootings. The United States ranks about 65th out of 90 countries that we have data for on mass public shootings. It's just that we don't recognize that because attacks in the rest of the world, except for maybe New Zealand or a couple other ones, usually don't get that much attention. But the countries that tend to have the most gun ownership tend to have the fewest mass public shootings.
I see my time's expired. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.